welcome to In the Cordon, the place where every cricketer wants to be. I'm your host, Callum Dunk, and thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's episode. Joining me on the show tonight is Louis Dade. Once again, Louis, how are you, mate?
Going very well, thanks, Callum. It's still coming off the basking glory of Travis Head doing his best Wiggles impersonation, and ready to talk some more World Cup cricket with you.
Absolutely. The scenes from India with Travis Head on the booze has been absolutely a delight to watch. Louis, before we get started, we just want to thank our sponsors at AX Sports. As we said the other night, the season's just started. If you need to top up your kit bag, make sure you head over to AX Sports at Holden Hill, as well as their location at Edwardstown. Get yourself a good deal and tell them In the Cordon sent you. Louis, it's been a fantastic World Cup, and we obviously had the show that we recorded on Monday going through the final in particular. But we said that the tournament started quite slowly, but as it got a bit more interesting and the results were started to become do or die contests, it became a much more thrilling spectacle, in my opinion. And we talk about some major talking points from the whole World Cup tonight, including India's dominance, but not being able to convert that into a title. We look at England's demise as well. And you could probably throw Pakistan in there as well as being quite disappointing this tournament. South Africa not being able to get it done again in finals cricket. Some promising signs from Afghanistan this tournament. I thought they were some of the highlights of the tournament. And I thought the Netherlands did well in this tournament as well. We'll both be going through our teams of the tournament tonight as well, and we'll be looking ahead to the 2027 World Cup, which is due to be played in South Africa. So, Louis, let's start off with India. I thought India throughout this tournament were sensational. As much as we gave them a bit of stick the other night, we have to respect a really good team. And India throughout this tournament were spot on. If we look at the run scorers, you've got Kohli on 765 runs and you've got Rohit Sharma on 597. Those two led the way for India. And then they were just able to get some really good cameos in various games. Rahul got 100. Iyer got a couple of hundreds throughout the tournament as well. Shubman Gill got an 80 odd in the semi-final against New Zealand. So all their key players were able to, contribute at the right times. And in the bowling department, you got Mohammad Shami, who took 24 wickets despite missing the first 4 matches of the tournament, which is a very impressive achievement. What are your thoughts on India throughout this tournament? And I know they weren't able to get over the line on Sunday night, but there's certainly a lot of positives that you can take away from this tournament.
If we're looking at it as a scope of work, I think I might have said the other night when we spoke that this is probably the best team to not win a World Cup. I think statistically, there's probably no argument against that. And you're right. From an Indian perspective, it's hard to evaluate this kind of performance. Interesting and at times selective journalism coming out of India over the last couple of days. Some local journalists kind of taking the stance of commending Australia or just recognising, perhaps some of the flaws in the way India played in the big game, whilst others, Mohammed Kaif comes to mind, taking more of a head in the sand approach. But at the end of the day, from the way that they, up until the final, they were pretty much seamless. You're right. You talked about Virat Kohli's performance, nigh on 800 runs. And from his perspective, a bit sad, I guess, that he couldn't have the capper. Obviously, he did win in 2011 as a much younger man. I think that what stood out with India and what made them so successful was their depth, as in clearly Australia proved on the right day that another 11 could beat their 11, but you felt from the Indian side that they could sustain injuries or absences or the whole way through, and the guys that were going to come in were going to be elite. Worth mentioning that with Hardik Pandya's injury, whether that might have changed their fate a little bit, and whether Ashwood maybe could have played a little bit more is the other question. Otherwise, it's really hard to pick fault in this side. A few things just statistically, and I do think that first game against Australia could have obviously very easily gone differently, had a few catches been held. But at the same point in time, this is an elite Indian team and a team that in any other scenario probably walks away with a trophy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, mate. You've summed it up really well. Mohammad Shami with 24 wickets, Jasprit Bumrah with 20 as well. Kuldeep Yadav with 15 wickets as well, and Jadeja took five for 33 in one of the matches and ended up with 16 wickets in the tournament. So a very all-round performance. Yes, whether Hardik Pandya was able to play a bit more in the tournament and probably play in place of Sky, you'd probably assume, whether that would have had an impact later on. But, Australia were just too good in that final. They read the pitch well. They read the conditions so much better and were able to get the rewards in the end. So I suppose the major talking point from this tournament, other than India not going all the way, was the demise of England, previous World Cup champions in 2019, or drawn World Cup champions in 2019. Let's go with that. That feels a lot much better to say. Other than, David Malan, being England's top run scorer with, over 400 runs, it was a pretty shocking tournament from an English perspective. Just they were not able to get any continuity with their bowlers. No one from England other than David Malan in the top 16 wicket takers or top 16 run scorers. So, yeah, that's a pretty telling stat. And, there was obviously a lot of hope for England going into this tournament, being previous champions, having Ben Stokes back in the one-day lineup after he previously announced his retirement. But Louis, what do you make of England's tournament? And do you feel like England, with the age of their one-day team, they're going to have to regenerate a little bit?
So there's probably two parts to this. I do think there are a few selections that maybe weren't bang on from the squad, and it was interesting. You obviously mentioned Milan being their leading run scorer, and he was one that was a last minute change for Jason Roy, who in hindsight probably should have gone. I do think it can't be underestimated the bizarre dynamic of having Ben Stokes come back in to this side. And I fully appreciate Ben Stokes' need for managing his own workload, why he hadn't played much one-day cricket, prior to this. But it's a tough one because he's clearly their spiritual leader, whether he's their captain or not. But at the same point in time, I do think it's a confusing dynamic. You clearly had a bit of animus in the camp, and I know that they came out, Matthew Mott came out and tried to shut those conversations down. But I think Owen Morgan pointing to that, considering he's clearly still involved with a lot of the players in that group, wasn't a great sign. And the other point to this is I'm not necessarily sure that this was the right squad for those conditions. If you look at the bowling side of it particularly, yeah, Mark Wood, weirdly enough, was someone that I would have backed to have a good tournament. He pretty much had a shocker. In the couple of games that we got to see of Sam Curran, who's someone that can swing the ball around in the right conditions, you think would be helpful. Moeen Ali in one-day cricket's always just been a bizarre concept for me in the sense that I don't think he's good enough to be a frontline spinner or a frontline batter in one-day cricket. He just becomes this bits and pieces guy. And so from that perspective, you got it just wasn't enough balance. I think Adil Rashid is a good player, but he's maybe not what he was at his peak. And then arguably David Willey was maybe their best bowler, and he retired mid-tournament because he didn't get a contract. And I don't think that helped either. I think having guys there while contract decisions were made was poor. I do think there's going to be a big refresh. The question is, in my opinion, is more who is the man to lead that refresh. Joss Butler, tremendous limited overs cricketer, had about as bad of a World Cup that someone of his talent level could possibly have. But at the same point in time, you look up and down this list. I mean, Harry Brooks got a lot of talent. I think going back to Joe Root would be a interesting decision, but not impossible. I just don't know what the direction is for this team coming out the other side of it. And at the end of the day, I think that England cricket put a lot of effort into the 2019 World Cup. I think they didn't put a lot of effort into this World Cup, and I think it showed in their performance.
Yeah, you make some really valid points, Louis. I think the choice of the fast bowlers that they took to India were not the right players. They picked a lot of blokes who can swing the ball, and we've seen with one-day cricket, yeah, sure, you're going to get some swing with the brand new Kookaburra at each end for 3 overs max, 4 if you're really lucky. It's just not the conditions to try and play like they do in England. And I think the spinners, I thought Adil Rashid was relatively solid this tournament, but just that second spinner was quite a letdown. And I think as well the choice to play Harry Brook in various games of this tournament wasn't probably quite the right move. I think he was probably someone who could play spin relatively well, as we've seen in tours of Pakistan, even though it's Test cricket. But I think he should have played more often for England. And as you said, I do believe the inclusion of Ben Stokes really mucked up the team dynamic. Like Ben Stokes is a tremendous player, and I do not blame England whatsoever for bringing Ben Stokes into this team if you think you are a genuine chance to win the World Cup. But yeah, I think the fast bowling department significantly let England down. As you said, Mark Wood had a shocker. Um, if Jofra Archer was fit and firing and ready to go, there is no doubt that he plays for England in those conditions as well. And the thing was, a lot of these blokes have had a decent amount of IPL experience and, should be relatively comfortable playing in those conditions. But unfortunately for England, it was one of those tournaments that didn't work out. One of the other teams that I thought was quite disappointing in this tournament was Pakistan, and Pakistan at their best, they're probably the best team to watch in the world. You look at guys like Babar Azam and Fakhar Zaman at the top of the order. Um, quality ball strikers. Muhammad Rizwan is a cricketer that I love to watch as well. And Shaheen Shah Afridi led their bowling department relatively well. Took a 5 for 59 in one of the matches, but outside of those, there wasn't too many players and just really high economy rates. I look at Harris Ralph took 16 wickets in the tournament, but his economy rate was extremely expensive. How do you sum up Pakistan's tournament as well, just very quickly before we move on to South Africa?
Look, I don't think you can talk about Pakistan's tournament without talking about health is the first and foremost thing. And we talked about the weird dynamic with the England team and some of what was happening there. Pakistan, again, we're in the middle of what seemed to be some sort of contract dispute. And I recognize that some of the details of that are not exactly public knowledge. But at the end of the day, to win these kind of tournaments, I don't think you can have anything lingering over your side like that. We saw it affect England. We saw it affect Pakistan. Obviously, Shaheen Shah Afridi was pretty handy with the ball. Harris Ralph was able to take wickets, but was expensive. At the end of the day, the other part that needs to come into this, which we saw in the game they played against Australia, is that I think that Pakistan continue to let themselves down in the field in big moments as well. And it's been a story of their World Cup history, which is obviously crowned by their 92 win, but other than that, has been a little bit underwhelming. This is a World Cup that they could have competed in, given the conditions, given their side. Probably the difference with England, between England and Pakistan, is I do think Pakistan have a nice, clear road coming out the other side of this. We recognise there'll be a change in leadership, but I think the talent pool is there if they can stay healthy and keep their guys together and ticking. Some of what happened earlier this week with Wahab Riaz and some of the fitness, some of the guys coming to Australia was a concerning start to that. But I do think Pakistan have the talent to bounce back. It's just, as always with them, their organisational capacity.
Yeah. And
probably worth mentioning as well, I thought Shadab was disappointing. That's probably the other part of this, that, Pakistan need their spinners to help them win games of cricket, and that certainly wasn't a good tournament from his perspective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I thought a lot rested on Shadab Khan's shoulders, and we know he is a world-class player who could play for Pakistan in all three formats. But I just think he does need the support around him of a slightly more senior spinner. I believe Shadab Khan's only about 24 years old from memory. So, he's still relatively young in the scheme of things. Louis, let's move on to South Africa. I thought in the group stage that they were obviously the second best team. Australia went on to win the title from third position. But I thought South Africa's batting, particularly when they were able to bat first and make the most of the daytime batting conditions, was quite spectacular. And you look at some of the run scorers for South Africa. Quinton de Kock, in his last one-day international tournament, made 594 runs. Aiden Markram was over 400 runs as well. Russie van der Dussen was 448. And Heinrich Klaassen, he's had a significant improvement in the last 12 to 18 months. He was 373. Obviously, this game was very much lost in that first power play of the semi-final against Australia, and there's no doubt that Stark and Hazelwood were spectacular in those conditions, and it was the best game that those two played for the tournament because there was actually a bit of juice in the wicket compared to what we've seen in previous games. But um, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. I listened to Willow Talk, which has got Brad Haddon on it, and he just constantly refers to the mental demons that South Africa seem to get when they do go to World Cup games. And playing against Australia in a final of a World Cup or a semi-final of a World Cup is obviously a very big thing. Australia have played so many of those matches and been able to perform under pressure in those situations. But um, I thought it was a really gutting way for South Africa to go out of this tournament, and obviously it would have been nice for them to make the final. But to be honest, I didn't have them in my semi-finals to begin with. I went with Australia, England, um, India, and Pakistan as my final four. So it was good to see South Africa get there, and I thought they weren't super dominant again in the series against Australia, which is an Australian B side or Australia A sort of side, one day side, if I'm being perfectly honest, in late August. But yeah, shame to see South Africa go out that way. But what did you make of it?
Look, in a way that they look. Let's be honest. 2 games into that series against Australia, they played in the lead up. They seemed a little bit in shambles, and from that point onwards, obviously they finished that series off well. They then had, from my perspective, a good World Cup. I don't think this is a case of, say, 2015, where they'll probably feel they should have gone one further or two further, depending on how you look at it. In the scheme of teams that South Africa have taken to World Cups, whilst this was a good team, I wouldn't say that the expectation was there. Like I said, in 2015, 1999, even 2007, where they underwhelmed. So I think despite the disappointment of the way they went out, they have to leave feeling pretty good about it. At the end of the day, obviously sad that Quinton de Kock's, not going to play one-day cricket anymore for them, but most of the other guys that are there, probably sans, I guess, David Miller, have still got plenty more cricket in front of them. Maharaj being a spinner probably means he's got a fair bit there. I think you've got to credit the way they played the game. Took the game on through the middle, which is really important. In the long run, what will be interesting more broadly with South African cricket is obviously there's no shortage of talent. How they go retaining talent, what guys are interested in playing, short form, long form, etc., is another question. But you do have to like it. And obviously, they walk away with Kurt Sear, who's probably the find of the tournament for them, and a guy that probably doesn't play if the injuries bounce the other way. So I think you've got to be pretty happy with that. And I don't think that this is a bad choke in the scheme of their history. I think they did a pretty good job to take that game pretty deep against Australia despite a poor start.
Yeah, I would agree. And Kutse did quite well in the tournament, taking 20 wickets. And Marco Jansen started the tournament quite well, but sort of dropped off a little bit towards the end. He still took 17, and Keshav Maharaj took 15. Louis, I want to talk about Afghanistan. I thought they were one of the good news stories of this tournament. And in World Cups gone by, you could slightly consider Afghanistan to be easy pushovers, but they genuinely had a chance to, go deeper into this World Cup. But if it was for some results here and there, it would have been nice to see them make it through to a semi-final. I still think they're probably one World Cup away from, genuinely trying to challenge. But as you can see, they've got some good batters. Gabars is a good batter at the top of the order with the gloves as well. Their quality spinners in Mujib and Rashid Khan are going to serve them for many years to come. And they're just such a promising team. And there was some games that I probably would have tuned out of earlier in the tournament. Once it got later into the tournament and I saw Afghanistan were playing, I was more inclined to watch it to see what they can do. And, obviously they're going to look back on the game against Australia and think, oh, what if, Glenn Maxwell got out pretty early? That would have been a very convincing win to Afghanistan. But the brilliance of Maxwell in 201 obviously changes the outlook on that game significantly. But what did you make of Afghanistan in this tournament? And were there any other teams that you were pleasantly surprised by?
So on the Afghani team, I listened to Jonathan Trott's assessment. Obviously, he's been doing a good job coaching there, from what it seems. And I think, look, from a positive perspective, they were a little bit more competitive than most people thought. Yes, conditions that probably favour them a bit more than, say, where they'll be playing in 2027. I think that this is clearly the beginning of their run now as an international, at least limited overs team that I think the previous versions of Afghanistan have always showed enough with the ball, but batting depth was probably the question. And this time around, it felt like, okay, this isn't just a matter of getting out one or two guys. They'll take it deeper, and they'll bat pretty well. So from that perspective, great. Most of their talent is still fairly young. Again, Muhammad Nabi, I'm not sure how much longer he'll be going around for, but the rest of those guys, I think, have still got plenty of cricket in front of them. A couple of things that are probably worth noting, maybe on the negative side or just as a takeaway. I think this is the last World Cup where they will be able to go in with basically no expectation. And I know they'll say they had expectation, but by the time 2027 rolls around, I think there will certainly be an expectation that they are a team that contends for what would be assumably the Super Sixes, which is sad for them in the sense that the easiest runs you'll make as an upcoming club in any sport is when the expectations are low. The only other, I guess, concern long run for them is the fact that they did rely so heavily on their spinners. And you saw it that game. Obviously, Glenn Maxwell made his double 100, which was once it was clear that he was comfortable with the spinning conditions. That they didn't have three frontline quicks they could go to. And I think that's going to be the nature of their side for a while. Generally speaking, though, good tournament. They weren't as reliant on Rashid Khan as they've been in the past. And main thing for me was a couple of young batters that you can really hold on to and say that they've got a future in the game.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. We're all about trying to get these developing nations to participate in these tournaments and genuinely challenge, because the more competition that we have, the more interesting that these tournaments are. Louis, let's move into our teams of the tournament. So I'm happy to go first for this one. This is available on the In the Cordon Facebook and Instagram pages, so make sure that you head over there and check it out. But this was quite a tough choice. I've had to leave a few Australians out, which breaks my heart, but there were some genuinely good performances across the board. But my captain for the tournament is Rohit Sharma, nearly 600 runs. Just gets the edge over David Warner, who didn't perform as well in those two finals, the semi and the final of this tournament. So that's what allowed Rohit Sharma to jump in over him. Quinton de Kock is my other opener and wicketkeeper. Virat Kohli at 3. The man speaks for himself. He was sensational. Rachin Ravindra, I thought he was sensational throughout the tournament, and I didn't really think too much of Rachin Ravindra heading into this tournament. I thought he was a okay cricketer. I thought he was lucky to get a game at times, but he really proved his worth in those conditions. And that 123 against England, along with Devon Conway's 152, really set up that tournament for New Zealand. And unfortunately, they weren't able to get over the line. At number 5, I've got Daryl Mitchell. The man continues to get better, and he's had a very impressive 18 months in all formats of cricket, and particularly I've enjoyed watching him in Test cricket. I've gone with Shreyas Iyer at number 6. I could have gone with KL Rahul, but I decided to go with Shreyas Iyer because I've already got a wicketkeeper in my side. Glenn Maxwell at 7, 100 off 40 balls, and then the double 100 against Afghanistan pretty much speaks for itself. I've gone with Jadeja over Mitch Santner. It was a really hard one to decide there, but I've gone with Jadeja. Muhammad Shami at 9. I think that speaks for himself. Madhu Shankar, I hope I pronounced that correct, from Sri Lanka.
Shankar seems to be the way of saying that one, yeah.
Yeah. apologies for pronunciation, but I thought he was sensational, and a real find for Sri Lanka in this tournament, who unfortunately didn't impress as much as they were probably hoping. And Adam Zampa is my 11th player in the side. 23 wickets in the tournament, and David Warner is the 12th man. I thought he was pretty unlucky. And Mitch Marsh was in contention for that spot as well. I thought he played some pretty valuable knocks in the tournament. That 177 against Bangladesh was pretty solid. So let's go with your team of the tournament, mate.
So I went for, and skippering as well, I went for Rowan up the top, pretty obvious from my perspective. I think while he missed the mark, while I missed the mark in the final, I don't think you can fault the guy that won 11 from 11. Quinton de Kock opening up with him and taking the gloves. Ravindra, Kohli, Mitchell, Maxwell, Jadeja. I went with Zampa, Bumrah, Shami, and I popped Mitch Stark in there as well. I was going to go for Matashanka, but got it back a couple of champions.
Very good, mate. Very good. And obviously the World Cup in 2027, that's meant to be played in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Kenya, I believe, will automatically qualify just being in that region. So that's really exciting for Zimbabwe, who didn't feature in this tournament. But we had a discussion on Monday night about we need to include more teams in this tournament. And you know, it's good that to get the best against the best, but that's what a Champions Trophy is for, in my opinion. And we're pretty pretty in unison about that the other night. But Louis, I just want to thank you so much for joining me in the Cordon again. It's been great to have you on the show and talk about the World Cup, and hopefully we'll be able to get you in the Cordon very soon.
Thanks for having me on, Callum. Always a pleasure, mate. And yeah, like you said at the start of the show, shout out to the guys at AX Sports, who I believe have their Christmas sale on. I might have to pop in and get some goods there myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks to AX Sports for their support. Make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe to In the Cordon, and we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.